Again, I do want to emphasize that it is HR's responsibility to maintain and track these appraisals. Indeed, HR must develop a system for maintaining appraisals as they develop the goals and outcomes for those appraisals. Moving on, though, there are, because of that discussion, because of having a systematic formula, having approach, there are legal risks to appraisals that we should discuss. And they have to do with how the conductors, the interviewers, mostly the supervisors that conduct the appraisals, treat the individual. And we're going to talk about some of the problems there. But the interesting thing is that for a plaintiff's attorney, an individual worker who files as a plaintiff an action against the employer for any reason, EEOC, such as American with Disabilities Act, Age Discrimination Act, all those legal issues that we've passed over and we're going to come back to in some ways. But if an individual files an action, it's usually the appraisals that serve as the evidence of the discriminatory pattern and the discriminatory practice. So these appraisals have to be very clean and neat and follow a very systematic approach. There's no real need to include anything that is extraneous, that's outside the job. Please don't include anything outside the job. It's in a sense that the attorneys for that individual will have access through discovery in a civil lawsuit to those appraisals, and those appraisals will serve as evidence of whatever the pattern or the practice of this federal or state law violation. So again, appraisals are typically one of the largest or central points of evidence for the plaintiff's attorney. Let's get into then a discussion on the different aspects, and I don't want to talk too much about these the levels that you actually compare people to if you do behavioral ratings, or if you combine ratings, or if you ask for critical incidents. There's all sorts of ways that you can conduct performance appraisals, and I'll leave those to you in the book. But I do want to mention one more thing before we get into rater errors, which is the way supervisors fail to properly appraise an employee. The management by objectives, the book mentions that it is actually not that popular of a strategy to keep the organization moving forward. But basically, MEOs are setting where the manager sets the goals, and then the goals are then followed up with the manager and the employee to match the team's goals, to match the organization's vision or whatever. It is a prevalent practice, but it often fails. And the reason for that is that managers often set goals that don't work, the goals that can't be met within a time frame, or they spend a lot of time setting goals and very little time actually getting those goals accomplished. Often I've seen where managers will put a goal out every 6 months and then redefine that goal so that the goals can never be accomplished. Employees get very low they have very low morale from that type of treatment. And again, there's many reasons. If you'll study MBO, management by objective has lots of problems, even though a lot of companies use it. It has to do with the fad that came out in, I think, the 60s or 70s. So again, just be careful of how you look at these processes as part of your own institution's appraisal method. So the last part is the discussion on the rater's error. So if an interviewer has some type of bias or some type of approach that is not standard, then the company actually faces risk. This is where this individual rater has created a record in the employee's performance appraisal, and it can be shown that individuals who are either treated better than others, it might be then a question of why is that? And it's because this person who is rating preferred a race or a gender or a religious background or a non-religious background or anything that's protected as a class They preferred that over others. So be careful with how raters work. I would simply control the rater's ability to interview and to set up the appraisal by the way that the forms are working, by the way the questions come out of HR, what we're looking at, that kind of thing. You can use check boxes, radial boxes, Likert scales, all kinds of, that's the least to the greatest kind of scale. So Likert scales work. Anything where there's an open narrative, though, can actually cause you to get on some thin ice. So what are they? Basically, the book gives you, I think, a very well-defined approach towards these errors, and I call them, again, heuristic traps. That was a mention in the earlier discussions. There's ways we do things, rules by which we act, and some of them are traps. So, for instance, some people work to, well, you're like me, so therefore I will rate you highly, but you're not like me, so therefore you don't score points. The rule for that person is I find people that are similar to me. That is a trap, that is a problem, that is an error, and should be ruled out through your human resources appraisal system, especially as, again, these create legal risks for classes that are protected. The last item, sorry about that, the last item is the appraisal feedback. It is imperative that the individual be allowed to report back. There must be some follow-up interview. This is a sort of last chance for the employee to check in with the supervisor. There are many times supervisors get these wrong. As a matter of fact, maybe the supervisor is having a difficult time personally, and so you need to have an ability to be flexible with the appraisers and the appraisees' feedback on these items. And even have a process for grievances out of these that may even, that's not a grievance as a union or a workers' condition of grievance, but just a personnel grievance process, which allows the individual to, who was reviewed or rated, to talk about why those negative comments came out or what the complaint was or the grievance might be. I think that's a good system to avoid a lot of employee leaving, avoid a lot of recidivism, absenteeism, a lot of other problems, to give the employee a voice.